in a depraved act of so-called vigilante justice. 49-year-old Jeffrey Endres is accused of intentionally mowing down a chiropractor and her family in broad daylight as revenge for a sensitive crime that occurred between their children. The incident happened in late April of 2025 in the Madison suburb of Cottage Grove, Wisconsin, where Dr. Cami Hansen, her husband, and the couple's sons were walking their dog. Hansen was thrown 25 to 30 feet and both she and the dog died from their injuries. Her husband survived with non-life-threatening injuries while the couple's son suffered a concussion and underwent emergency surgery. They recalled hearing Endres rev his car before ramming into the family, and witnesses described seeing the car accelerate before it jumped the curb and hit the victims. Endres told officers that he lost control of his car, but eyewitness accounts told a much different story. Investigators have not gone into detail about the nature of the sensitive crime that supposedly motivated Endres to run the victims over, but the authorities have made it clear that they do not believe the collision was an accident. According to police, Endres and the Hansens were once neighbors, and Endres researched the alleged crime just hours before the crash. After receiving treatment at a hospital, Endres was booked into the Dane County Jail on suspicion of first-degree homicide and other charges. In an unexpected turn of events, he passed away behind bars just days later. The case remains under investigation, and authorities have not yet released the accused killer's cause of death. Number 22. Dawayland Hurst. 23-year-old mother of two, Mary Jane Collins, had just moved into a new apartment in Seabrook, Texas, when she was bludgeoned and stabbed to death in front of her young children in October of 2024. She had recently complained to her friends about her abusive boyfriend, 22-year-old Dawayland Ernest Hurst, instantly making him a person of interest to investigators. In a bizarre twist, the father of Collins' children, Michael King, was serving time for the murder of Hurst's half-brother, Deangelo Triplet, when Hurst and Collins began dating in June of 2024. On the day of Collins' murder, 4 months later, she had received a prison video call from King. During the conversation, Hurst taunted King and could be seen hitting one of the children. Collins could be heard pleading with Hurst to stop and telling him to get away from her son, and she was wearing the same outfit that was on her body when she was found. The footage circulated on social media, and Collins was found dead in her apartment later that day. Her children were scared but physically unharmed, and Hurst was nowhere in sight. A warrant was issued for Hurst's arrest, and he was apprehended several weeks later on a laundry list of charges out of 3 counties, including homicide, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, resisting arrest, evading arrest, and more. Based on the circumstances of Collins' murder, prosecutors believe Hurst pursued a relationship with her and killed her to avenge the death of Triplet, who was killed in 2020. He's currently being held without bond at the Galveston County Jail as he awaits trial. Number 21. The Buzzards. While reporting to a reported shooting in August of 2019, sheriff's deputies found 49-year-old Jerry Tapp dead in the front yard of his Delaware County, Oklahoma home. He had been shot multiple times, while his girlfriend suffered a non-fatal gunshot wound to the wrist. Based on eyewitness accounts, police pulled over a white Nissan Altima, matching the description of a car that was seen fleeing the crime scene. The driver, Dakota Chase Buzzard, was soon identified as a suspect in the shooting along with his brother, Cody Dwayne Buzzard, and their father, James Buzzard. The trio were accused of murdering Tapp in retaliation for firing a gun into a car occupied by James Buzzard and the preteen victim 4 years earlier, which had left the child with a non-life-threatening gunshot wound. All 3 suspects were detained on state-level charges for nearly 2 years, before the case was transferred to the Cherokee Nation, which is overseen by federal authorities. Because this required the filing of new charges, the Buzzards were released from jail during the transfer of jurisdiction. During that time, they went on the run. They remained at large for several days before they were captured by Cherokee Nation marshals. 31-year-old Cody Dwayne Buzzard pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in Indian country and carrying, using, brandishing, and discharging a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of post-release supervision. 23-year-old Dakota Chase Buzzard pleaded guilty to conspiracy to carry, use, brandish, and discharge a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence, and was sentenced to 6.5 years behind bars. 52-year-old James Buzzard took his case to trial and was found guilty of first-degree murder in Indian country, assault with a dangerous weapon with intent to do bodily harm in Indian County, and carrying, using, or discharging a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence. He was sentenced to life in prison, plus 10 years. Number 20. Cathleen Roth. Police were initially baffled when 61-year-old schoolteacher Ellen Roth vanished from her Albuquerque, New Mexico home. In May of 2009, there were no signs of forced entry, and law enforcement couldn't fathom who would want to kill the well-liked educator, or why. But it didn't take long for investigators to discover the toxic nature of Roth's relationship with her 19-year-old adopted son, Brian, and his 21-year-old wife, Kathleen. Brian had long struggled with drug addiction and behavioral issues, and his already strained relationship with his mother only worsened after he met and married Kathleen in March of 2009, just months before Roth's murder. Brian was arrested for threatening Ellen with a knife. He was placed on probation but ended up back in jail just weeks before Roth's death, when she accused him of stealing her debit card and jewelry. Brian was in custody when Roth disappeared, but police still suspected him of being involved. It was clear based on jailhouse phone call recordings that Kathleen blamed Roth for Brian being in jail, making the young woman an obvious person of interest in the case. During these conversations, the couple mentioned a third possible suspect, Bella Gonzalez, whom they were in a polyamorous relationship with. 4 months after Roth went missing, an anonymous tipster told police that she had been strangled to death. The informant identified the getaway driver, Christopher Donovan, who identified Kathleen's boyfriend on the side, James Johnson, as the actual killer. Donovan also implicated Kathleen in the crime and admitted to helping her and Johnson bury Roth's body in the Jemez Mountains. Police also spoke with Bella Gonzalez, who admitted that Kathleen was enraged by Brian's arrest. When confronted with the evidence, Kathleen admitted to participating in her mother-in-law's murder and led investigators to the body. She pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and was sentenced to 37 years in prison. James Johnson pleaded guilty to similar charges and received a 28-year sentence, while Christopher Donovan received a 15-year sentence for second-degree murder. Ironically, Brian Roth was never charged in connection with the killing. Number 19. The murder of Cati Blauvelt. 22-year-old Cati Blauvelt disappeared in October 2016 after finishing her shift at a pet store in Greenville, South Carolina. By the time her body was found in the basement of an abandoned house in nearby Simpsonville, 2 days later, her estranged husband, U.S. Army soldier John Blauvelt, had ditched the military and fled the state with his teenage girlfriend, Hannah Thompson. Cati's body was covered in stab wounds, making it clear that she died at the hands of foul play. Unable to locate John, authorities charged him in absentia with his wife's murder while the investigation continued. Law enforcement soon discovered that John had recently been demoted due to domestic violence allegations and that he reportedly blamed Cati for reporting the incident, leading to the suspicion that he killed her for revenge. A few months after skipping town with John, Hannah Thompson returned to South Carolina alone. She claimed to have no knowledge of John's whereabouts, but would admit 6 years later that the two had secretly kept in touch for several years. With her help, a team of cold case investigators tracked John to Medford, Oregon, where he was living under the alias Ben Klein. He was apprehended by the U.S. Marshals and extradited to South Carolina, where he was found guilty of Cati's murder in September of 2024. John Blauvelt was sentenced to life without parole and is reportedly in the process of appealing his conviction. Hannah Thompson was charged with obstruction, accessory after the fact, and neglect in reporting a crime. She is currently awaiting trial and could face up to 55 years in prison if convicted as charged. Number 18. Renard Winfield Jr. 31-year-old Tommy Curry thought he was going to meet a woman he had connected with via Plenty of Fish when he was lured to his murder in Iowa City, Iowa. On April 28, 2021, he was fatally ambushed by over a dozen bullets while sitting in his SUV outside an apartment complex. Where he believed he was waiting to pick up his date, Curry suffered gunshot wounds to the chest, arm, hand, head, and scalp, but he most likely died from the bullet to his chest, which damaged 2 arteries and caused massive bleeding. As it turned out, the Plenty of Fish account that Curry had communicated with prior to his murder was fake. Investigators traced the bogus profile to 32-year-old Renard Winfield Jr. of Gary, Indiana, whom Curry had shot and injured nearly a year earlier. Determined to exact revenge on his own terms, Winfield had refused to identify his shooter to police and no arrests were made in connection with the incident. In addition to being linked to the Plenty of Fish account, he was implicated in the crime through surveillance footage and suspicious internet searches he conducted after killing Curry. Winfield denied any involvement in the murder, but the evidence spoke for itself, and he was charged accordingly. A Johnson County jury found him guilty of first-degree murder in December 2024 after deliberating for just 4 hours, resulting in an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 17. Michael Keetley. In a tragic case of mistaken identity that left 4 victims injured and 2 others dead, an ice cream truck driver named Michael Keetley opened fire on a group of 6 men who were playing cards outside a Ruskin, Florida home on Thanksgiving Day in 2010. The victims were enjoying some adult beverages and minding their own business when Keetley pulled up in a minivan and exited the vehicle with a shirt that said "Sheriff" on it. Armed with a gun, he told the group he was looking for a man nicknamed Creeper, who the victims knew but was not present at the gathering. Believing Keetley was a real cop, the victims obeyed his commands to get down on the ground. He proceeded to fatally shoot 28-year-old Juan Hitron and his 22-year-old brother Sergio Hitron, while the other men survived their injuries. Keetley fled the scene before police arrived, and investigators were initially at a loss to identify a suspect. A few days after the shooting, an informant told investigators that Keetley had recently been talking about his plans to get revenge on a pair of masked thieves who had robbed and opened fire on him 11 months earlier. During the previous incident, the perpetrators shot Keetley 5 times and made off with $12, leaving him permanently disabled. Keetley had mistakenly suspected Creeper of being one of the thieves, when in reality none of his victims or intended victims had anything to do with the robbery. Authorities arrested Keetley several days after the crime, and he spent the next decade in county lockup until the case went to trial in 2020. His defense attorneys argued that he was medically incapable of committing the crime due to his injuries from being shot months earlier, and accused the police of carrying out a faulty investigation, which they described as nothing short of a nightmare. The first trial ended in a mistrial, and the case dragged on for 3 more years. In 2023, more than 12 years after the shooting, a second jury found Keetley guilty of 2 counts of murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 6 concurrent life terms without the possibility of parole. Number 16. Mohamed Tagir. After being busted in an anti-gang operation in the Denver, Colorado metro area in 2017, Mohamed Tagir and Marcus Pine were indicted for their membership in a Sudanese criminal organization known as the Kings of Denver, which was accused of burglarizing more than 50 homes. Pine cooperated and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, while Tagir was found guilty and received a 17-year prison term. He served just 6 years of his sentence before being paroled in 2023. But instead of focusing on staying out of prison, Tagir sought vengeance against Pine for helping the authorities put him away. 4 months after his release, Tagir and another man fatally shot Pine from behind outside his apartment building, where they waited in the bushes for 3 hours before firing at him 8 times. In January of 2025, an Arapahoe County jury found Tagir guilty of murder, conspiracy, retaliation against a witness, and aggravated motor vehicle theft, resulting in an automatic life sentence without parole. His unidentified accomplice remains at large. Number 15. Malique Lewis and Marcel Vines. 3 days after Christmas in 2017, the murdered body of 23-year-old Carice Lewis was found in the trunk of her burning car in a Washington, D.C. alleyway. That same day, the body of Armani Nico Coles was found dumped along a busy highway in Maryland. Both victims had been kidnapped at gunpoint and shot. Investigators traced the crimes to 2 20-something gang members named Marcel Vines and Malique Lewis, who were accused of committing the double homicide in a bid for revenge just hours after the murder of their friend, Ronze Green, who had been shot dead by a friend of the victims. Malique Lewis, who is not related to victim Carice Lewis, and Vines, knew who the killer was and went searching for him, but apparently decided that murdering Coles and Carice Lewis was good enough. A federal jury found the suspects guilty of both murders in August of 2024, and in March of 2025, they were each sentenced to life plus 60 years in federal prison. A third suspect, Anthony Briscoe, was initially charged alongside Lewis and Vines, but disappeared from news updates about the case, indicating that he likely cooperated with the authorities. Number 14. The Murder of Ray Wright. In January of 2018, 55-year-old master carpenter Raymond Ray Wright failed to show up at his job and suddenly went radio silent. 2 days later, his brother Dean paid a visit to Ray's Sacramento, California home, where he came face to face with a man he didn't recognize in the kitchen. The intruder fled, and Dean called the police. 10 days after Ray vanished, his truck was found abandoned with his blood on the interior. During an unrelated pursuit nearly a week later, police discovered Ray's stolen registration sticker on a van driven by 48-year-old Victor Merle Gray. Inside the vehicle, officers found several of Ray's belongings, including his broken eyeglasses and a letter Gray had written to a man named Bob, demanding payment for Ray's abduction. 6 years earlier, Ray had caused a car accident while driving drunk, permanently injuring a man named Robert Bobby Manor and his wife. He had failed to pay regularly on his $275,000 court-ordered debt to the Manors, causing investigators to suspect that Bobby was somehow involved in Ray's murder. Ray's body was never found, but prosecutors made the rare decision to move forward with a murder case against Gray and Manor, who were both found guilty in 2023 and sentenced to life without parole. They continue to maintain their innocence from behind bars, but have failed to make any headway in their attempts to appeal their cases. Number 13. John Sheldon Pickens Jr. and Derwin Idell Moore. 29-year-old Ray Roderick Brown was killed outside of a saloon in the Dayton's Bluff neighborhood of St. Paul, Minnesota, in September of 2019. Shortly before his murder, he was seen shaking hands with John Sheldon Pickens Jr., who immediately called Derwin Idell Moore and informed him of Brown's whereabouts. A short while later, Moore approached Brown on foot and shot him in the chest. Brown was killed as an act of retribution for the 2019 murder of 33-year-old Michael Gray, who had also been shot outside of a bar. In late 2022, a grand jury indicted Pickens and Moore on first-degree murder and other charges. 34-year-old Moore pleaded guilty to a reduced second-degree murder charge in September of 2023 and was sentenced to 34 years in prison. In July of 2024, Pickens pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting an offender in exchange for a 16.5-year prison sentence. The term runs concurrent to a federal sentence that he's currently serving for gun and drug charges, with records showing a projected release date of April 2030. After he finishes serving his federal time, he'll likely be transferred to a Minnesota prison to finish the remainder of his state sentence. Number 12. Louzell Davis Jr. Jacob Ashford was just a teenager when he was fatally shot on the front porch of a St. Louis, Missouri home on Saturday, December 3rd, 2022. He was pronounced dead at the scene after being discovered slumped over with at least 12 bullet wounds. 34-year-old Louzell Davis Jr. had killed Ashford as an act of revenge for the shooting death of his son, who had been killed the previous evening while attempting to steal a car with a group of other juveniles. Davis Jr. and his father, Louzell Davis Sr., had confronted Ashford, who they believed had been involved in the incident. When they didn't get the desired response, Davis Jr. forced Ashford onto the porch and ambushed him in a hail of bullets. He initially denied any involvement in the crime, but had a change of heart as his scheduled trial approached. As part of a plea deal, Davis Jr. pleaded guilty to a reduced second-degree murder charge and armed criminal action, and received prison sentences totaling 20 years. Number 11. Deangelo McNeal. During the summer of 2020, a Michigan teenager named Marquavius Q. Baston shot and injured an assault rifle-wielding assailant who had opened fire on his Saginaw apartment complex. The gunman, Deangelo Northside McNeal, was sentenced to 2 years in prison for felony gun charges, and Baston was cleared of any wrongdoing after investigators determined that he had acted out of a legitimate fear for his life. While serving his time, McNeal allegedly became consumed by anger and a desire to get even with the young man who had returned fire during the shooting. Prosecutors say it's no coincidence that Baston was fatally shot in March of 2025, just a handful of months after 36-year-old McNeal was paroled. The victim was found dead in his car with multiple bullet wounds, and McNeal was implicated in the crime through both eyewitness accounts and surveillance footage. He was arrested several days after Baston's death and is being held at the Saginaw County Jail on charges of open murder, carrying a concealed weapon, felon in possession of a firearm, felon in possession of ammunition, and 3 counts of second offense felony firearm. Number 10. Brian Tucker. In 2016, a 48-year-old Kentucky man named Brian Tucker was accused of conspiring to burn down the home of a friend. He maintained his innocence and was acquitted by a jury 3 years later. In a lawsuit that followed, Tucker accused an insurance company and a private investigation firm of providing false evidence, which was used to secure his indictment. A few months after a judge dismissed the case during the summer of 2024, an informant told police that Tucker had been plotting to murder Commonwealth attorney Rob Sanders and Kenton County Judge Kathy Lape, the latter of whom oversaw his criminal trial. According to the tipster, Tucker had talked about possibly slitting Sanders' throat or shooting him with a sniper rifle. During the investigation, police spoke with Tucker's brother and girlfriend, who both expressed concerns over his recent behavior, including violent mood swings and a seemingly growing hatred for law enforcement. In November of 2024, he was charged with retaliating against participants in a legal process. He remains in custody at the Kenton County Jail with bonds set at $500,000. Number 9. Christopher Calvert. 76-year-old musician Clayton Clay Wick was found beaten, cut, and stabbed to death inside his Kennewick, Washington home by his cleaning lady in May of 2022. 2 days later, police tracked his stolen SUV to a small town in rural Skamania County, where they arrested 44-year-old Christopher Calvert on suspicion of murder. Calvert had recently been fired from his job at a farm owned by one of Wick's friends after lying about having a sick child and stealing his boss's car. And while Wick appeared to have no involvement in the loss of Calvert's job, all signs pointed toward Calvert killing Wick as an act of revenge against his former boss. In the days following the murder, he made some alarming statements implying that he had harmed Wick, including by telling a friend he had done better than that. When the friend offered to help him get revenge by cutting his former boss's sprinkler lines, Calvert had also asked a friend if he knew how to dig a hole and hinted that he had gotten even with his ex-boss for firing him. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and car theft in May of 2024 and received consecutive prison sentences totaling 30 years. Number 8. Eli Zachary Shinhoster. When a Florida teenager named Eli Zachary Shinhoster became resentful toward his ex-girlfriend for breaking up with him, he allegedly took his anger out on the young woman's mother, 39-year-old Eulalia Gonzalez Martin de Osorio, who was found murdered in her Miami-Dade home in late June of 2024. She had been shot dead on her front porch while attempting to flee from her attacker with her newborn in her arms. Shinhoster's girlfriend, Gonzalez's daughter, had ended their relationship roughly 2 months earlier, after dating for about 9 months. Prior to the murder, Shinhoster had been calling Gonzalez and talking to her about her daughter. He had also reportedly threatened to kill his ex-girlfriend if she refused to get back together with him. According to authorities, he went to the victim's home intent on killing a member of his ex's family as a punishment for dumping him. Several days after the killing, Shinhoster was arrested on a second-degree murder charge. He pleaded not guilty and is currently being held at the Miami-Dade County Jail, where he was transferred from juvenile custody after prosecutors decided to charge him as an adult. Number 7. Gregory Cunningham Jr. Broward County, Florida resident Gregory Cunningham Jr. was forced to grow up fast after witnessing the murder of his cousin, Michael Smith, during a botched drug deal in 2011. He was never able to let go of his anger over Smith's death, especially after the killer, Joaquin Ham, was sentenced to just 6 years in prison for a third-degree murder charge. Unwilling to come to terms with the situation in a more peaceful way, Cunningham shot Ham to death shortly after the victim's release from prison in 2020. The killing was captured on video, which showed a Mercedes-Benz pulling up to Ham's car in Fort Lauderdale. Several shots rang out before the vehicle peeled away. Based on the evidence, including cell phone location data and incriminating notes and messages saved on Cunningham's phone, investigators concluded that he had killed Ham to exact vengeance for his cousin's death nearly a decade earlier. But prosecutors failed to sell their case to a jury, and in 2023, Cunningham was acquitted of first-degree murder and shooting into a vehicle. Number 6. Martin and Shaun Breeze. Late one night in February of 2024, an enraged driver rammed his van into a group of pedestrians on a sidewalk in Ingleby, Barwick, England, killing 60-year-old Brian Darby and injuring 3 others. Later identified as 57-year-old Martin Breeze, the out-of-control motorist had deliberately targeted the victims, who had argued with his 30-year-old son, Shaun, earlier that evening. According to reports, the victims had complained about Shaun riding his bike through them while searching for drugs. After learning about the confrontation, Martin got behind the wheel of his vehicle while high on drugs and alcohol and mowed the group down. Darby was pronounced dead at the scene after being dragged along the pavement for nearly 500 feet. The Breezes fled the scene and tried to claim that their vehicle had been stolen, but were identified as the culprits and charged accordingly. In early 2025, Martin Breeze was found guilty of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 32 years in prison, while Shaun received a 16-year sentence for manslaughter and 3 counts of grievous bodily harm. Number 5. Jules Johnson. During the early morning hours of May 19, 2019, 43-year-old Melvin Webb was murdered in the parking lot of a bar and lounge in Slidell, Louisiana. The incident was captured on security video, which showed the perpetrator approaching Webb and shooting him in the face before fleeing on foot. Several eyewitnesses, including the victim's wife, identified the gunman as 34-year-old Jules Johnson. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, he had been seen lurking outside of Webb's home. Johnson had killed Webb to avenge the murder of his father, Sherman Dees, who had been shot dead outside the same bar by Webb's cousin 5 years earlier for allegedly harassing 2 women. Webb had served prison time for helping his cousin evade law enforcement, further fueling any desire for revenge that Johnson may have already felt. In May of 2024, a St. Tammany Parish jury found Johnson guilty of Webb's murder and a gun charge, landing him an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 4. Elgin Wilson. In what authorities later described as a targeted act of retaliation, mother of 5 Shirley Coleman was shot dead the day after her 47th birthday in October of 2018. Police discovered her bullet-riddled body on Wilmington, Delaware's east side, while responding to a report of shots fired shortly before 5 o'clock in the morning. Coleman had been shot 6 times and was pronounced dead at the scene. Less than a week later, police arrested a teenager named Elgin Wilson on an unrelated drug charge. While searching his devices, investigators found incriminating information connecting him to Coleman's murder. Surveillance footage and other evidence also linked Wilson to the crime, and police didn't need to look too hard to find a motive. Wilson was accused of killing Coleman to get back at one of her sons, Antonio Russell, for his brother's murder. Because Russell was serving a 15-year prison sentence for the crime, Wilson chose to take his anger out on his mother. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and second-degree conspiracy in August of 2022 and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Number 3. Lee Blackwell. Most people would never take their anger towards someone out on that person's child, no matter how much they hated the person. But some people will exact vengeance at any cost, including the taking of a completely innocent life. This is the line of thinking that likely influenced Lee Blackwell's decision to kill the young daughter of a man who was dating his ex-wife in 2014. On July 8th of 2009, Blackwell stationed himself inside a Spartanburg, South Carolina parking garage and waited for the right moment to attack Heather Brooke Center. He put the little girl into a headlock and shot her 4 times, killing her instantly. Blackwell never showed any remorse for his actions, so it was arguably not surprising when a jury found him guilty of murder and kidnapping after deliberating for just 20 minutes following his trial in 2014. He was sentenced to capital punishment and remains on death row after unsuccessfully attempting to get his conviction overturned. Today's topic was requested by Melissa Ray 1975. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comment section below. Number 2. Baysean Jones. 19-year-old Ronald Brown and 41-year-old Taiwan Wilson were killed, and a third victim was critically injured during a shooting in a Washington, D.C. parking lot in late July of 2022. Later that year, 27-year-old Baysean Jones was arrested on murder charges in connection with the case. According to prosecutors, he had killed the victims to settle a score amid an ongoing beef with Brown, who had allegedly shot Jones and the mother of his child 5 days earlier. Jones did not report the previous incident to police, who believed that he chose not to tell law enforcement because he wanted to pursue his own version of justice. A witness told investigators that Jones had planned to put a $30,000 hit out on Brown, and the 2 men were seen arguing in a tobacco store just hours before the deadly shooting. Jones's decision to square the situation away on his own terms had disastrous consequences, including the death of Wilson, an innocent bystander who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was arrested 4 months after the killings, and in 2024 a jury found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of assault with intent to kill, and multiple weapon-related charges, resulting in an 80-year federal prison sentence. Hang tight after the final chapter if you have not yet seen our episode about when oversized egos go wrong. That's coming up right after this. Number 1. Keith Coleman. In October of 2022, 25-year-old Keith Z. Coleman Jr. was arrested in Columbus, Ohio for the July 3rd shooting death of 32-year-old Henry B. Moore. Emergency responders found Moore clinging to life with a gunshot wound shortly after midnight and rushed him to the hospital, where he succumbed to his wounds. Shortly after his arrest, Coleman was indicted on 4 charges relating to Moore's death, including aggravated murder, and 8 charges stemming from unrelated incidents, including the shooting of another victim who survived their injuries. Resorting to violence as a way to solve his problems had clearly landed him in some serious hot water with the law, and he's now paying the price in the form of a life sentence. Coleman was found guilty of the aggravated murder charge along with 2 weapon-related counts in November of 2024. He'll be around 60 years old when he becomes eligible for parole in the year 2057.
2 men were recorded in the midst of an argument on October the 22nd of 2018, and the video went viral following the incident's violent climax. One man, who had the word "Coach" written on the back of his purple t-shirt, confronted another who was wearing black gloves and sported a goatee. The former wasn't identified, and given the confrontation's outcome, was simply referred to as Coach by netizens. He berated the other man, who was in a state of intoxication, for urinating on the garden fence of his home in Bushey, Hertfordshire. Although enraged, Coach initially maintained his composure as his wife and children were present during the conflict. The woman told the goatee sporting intruder, who'd become aggressive, "You're upsetting my son, now move away." The man, however, removed his shirt, flexed his muscles at Coach and squared up to fight while blocking the property's gate, which he eventually damaged by leaning on it. The father gave him ample chances to walk away, at one point saying, "You're on my property. You're in front of my children and my wife. Move on." His wife was heard talking to the police in the viral clip's audio. The man with the goatee refused to leave, and in a split second, Coach delivered a crushing elbow strike to his head. The intruder was knocked out on his feet before falling backwards on the sidewalk. Coach kicked him while he was down, yelling at him, "I warned you." As the clip spread online, commenters were overwhelmingly supportive of the father's actions, praising his patience. One user said of the man with the goatee, "You had your warnings, folded like a deck chair," while another wrote, "That idiot got what he deserved." The police spoke to the knockout victim on November the 7th, and he reportedly refused to press charges. Number 6. Savannah Sprague. In September of 2018, a video uploaded to Twitter of a wild brawl between two girls in Concord, California, went viral, rapidly gaining hundreds of thousands of views. Savannah Sprague, a cheerleader at Clayton Valley Charter High School, was in her uniform while sitting at a table with other youngsters, including a fellow cheerleader. She was approached by a group from which another female teenager challenged her to a fight. Sprague tried to avoid the confrontation, telling her antagonist that nobody wants to fight and nobody talks about you guys. The cheerleader remained seated and told the girl standing over her to back away and stop touching her. Seconds later, the other girl slapped Sprague in the face. Still clutching her phone, Sprague sprang up and began swinging wildly at her aggressor, with multiple strikes landing on her head and back. The cheerleader then grabbed the other girl by the head and slammed her to the ground. In the moments that followed, Sprague mounted her considerably larger opponent and continued landing quick-fire punches to her face. The teens rose to their feet, were eventually separated, and started to collect themselves towards the end of the video. Some bystanders were heard laughing at and making fun of the teen who'd started the fight for getting bested by the cheerleader, while another teenager spoke directly into the camera saying he loved rumbles. The clip was uploaded to the Twitter account of Sprague's sister, Sierra, who praised Savannah for not backing down, writing, "I don't think I've ever been more proud." Number 5. Incident in Melbourne. At around 1 a.m. on March the 20th of 2016, a couple entered the Lamb Kebab shop in the South Yarra suburb of Melbourne, Australia. As shown on CCTV footage, a drunken young man then came stumbling into the store and started talking to the couple. As reported by the kebab shop's owner, John Yarrick, the inebriated man proceeded to act sleazy towards the blonde woman. Surveillance footage captured him touching her and saying something that left her gasping in visible shock. In the moments that followed, the woman's partner, who was clad in all black, kicked him in the shin and pointed his finger at him as a warning. A third kebab shop customer, who was wearing a blue shirt, attempted to intervene. It remained unclear if he was associated with any of the parties or a simple bystander. The inebriated man then quickly threw a 2-punch combination at the head of the blonde woman's companion. He then stepped outside, where he was captured by a different surveillance camera as he began shifting his weight while adopting a boxing stance. The man in black was seemingly held back as he emerged from the shop, but he broke free and charged the drunken aggressor. He landed a single thunderous punch to the man's head, which floored him. Police and paramedics arrived at the scene in the aftermath, but no arrests occurred as neither man wanted to give a statement. Yarrick, who'd been running the kebab shop for 15 years, later told the media that he'd been forced to install security cameras following an increase of weekend violence in the area. Yarrick was quoted as saying, "They want to fight. I don't know why." Number 4. Ben Sassoli. UFC fighter Ben Sassoli was working security at the Jackson's Lounge Bar in Toorak, Melbourne, Australia, in September of 2019. Sassoli was a heavyweight nicknamed the Combat Wombat, who in his spare time made YouTube videos instructing viewers on how to knock somebody out. While at the bar, Sassoli found himself in a situation with a drunken patron who'd twice been kicked out of the establishment but who'd snuck back inside. Sassoli marched him outside, but the belligerent man reportedly threatened to beat him up. The UFC fighter, who was at the time in his late 20s, responded with devastating force as he punched the man in the face so hard he subsequently had to undergo specialized facial surgery. Sassoli was subsequently arrested, and in 2020 he pleaded guilty to recklessly causing serious injury in Victoria's County Court. In the fall of that year, he was jailed for 22 months in order to serve half of his sentence before he could be considered for parole. The sentencing judge told him that encountering drunken and aggressive patrons was a normal occurrence for a bar security staff, emphasizing, "You are expected not to respond to provocation in the way you did." In the aftermath of his legal troubles, Sassoli's contract with the UFC was terminated. Number 3. Incident in Glasgow. On October the 29th of 2021, 2 men were recorded by a bystander as they were in the midst of a dispute outside the White Cart Chippy in Cathcart, Glasgow, Scotland. One of them, a driver, claimed that the other man, who was inebriated, had punched his wing mirror. The strike on the vehicle wasn't caught on camera. The inebriated man then moved towards the driver, attempting to fight him. In spite of the fact that the latter continuously backed away, the driver insisted, "I don't want to hit you, you're trying to hit me," and was adamant that he wasn't going to fight. A third man from a nearby shop fruitlessly tried to intervene, telling the inebriated aggressor to calm down. The latter wouldn't relent as he took off his jacket and persisted in lunging at the driver, who appeared to be shorter and lighter than him. As tensions reached their climax, the drunken man moved towards the motorist with his clenched fists held down by his waist. The driver then threw a swinging right hand at the man's chin, which dropped him. He hit his head as he collapsed in the street and remained flat before the video cut off. According to subsequent reports from a Police Scotland spokesman, a 47-year-old man was charged in connection to the incident. Number 2. Stuart Briggs. Street thug Stuart Briggs was recorded on cell phone video on September the 14th of 2021, walking up to a pair of teenagers as they sat on a bench in Guysborough, a market town in the northeast of England. Briggs targeted one of the teens, Alex Williams, and shouted at him, "I'm going to smash your head in, and I'm going to stab you down the alley." What Briggs didn't know was that Williams was a junior world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Briggs was more than twice Williams' age, started pouring at the teen while he remained seated. As tensions escalated, Williams got up, wrapped his arms below Briggs' waist and hoisted him in the air. In a move commonly known as a double leg takedown, Williams flipped the aggressor and slammed him onto the pavement. Briggs remained aggressive in the moments that followed, but Williams deftly defended himself, applying his martial arts training. Only after the thug walked away did Williams realize that he was bleeding profusely. After Briggs had bitten off a chunk of his ear during the brawl, he called the police and went to the hospital, where he received several stitches for his injury. In the aftermath, Williams, a student at Prior Pursglove College, spoke to Teesside Live about the attack and said, "I saw an opportunity to defend myself and fight back, so I took it." Video of the incident went viral, and the story was picked up by multiple national press outlets. Many lauded the team for standing up for himself and condemned Briggs for his thuggish behavior. In November of 2022, Briggs was jailed for 20 months at Teesside Crown Court after he'd pleaded guilty to causing grievous bodily harm without intent. Number 1. Chaz Wearing. On the afternoon of January the 4th of 2024, two men were caught on video arguing on a subway platform at the 34th Street SEPTA station in University City, Philadelphia. One of the men, an unnamed 38-year-old, was recorded pinning the other, identified as homeless man Chaz Waring, against a support pillar. The cause of their dispute was unclear, but while the men were talking to each other, the 38-year-old kept pulling back his right arm as if he was gearing up to strike Waring. They were both close to the train tracks as the confrontation unfolded. Waring eventually broke free from the grip of his aggressor, who was much taller and heavier. Waring then swung twice at the 38-year-old, landed a punch that seemingly stunned him, causing him to stumble towards the edge of the platform. Waring himself dropped back onto the platform while the other man fell onto the tracks just as the L train was pulling into the station. Within seconds, he was struck by the train as a woman's screams were heard in the video's background. The man died on the spot. Waring fled the scene but was later taken into custody at 40th and Market Streets. At the time, Waring had an open strangulation case in Delaware County and a criminal history in both Clinton and Lycoming counties. For the subway incident, he was charged with involuntary manslaughter, and the case was ongoing as of the latest updates.
Thanks for watching. If you were violently mugged, would you prefer to receive $10,000 in compensation or see the perpetrator sentenced to 10 years in prison, and why? Let us know in the comments section below.